The dryer stopped on a Tuesday morning in October, 9 days into the most important post-harvest stretch of the year. Warren Shell had been running corn through the new grain dryer since the third week of September. The machine was a Sukup commercial unit, propane-fired, continuous flow, rated at 400 bushels per hour under ideal conditions. He'd financed it in late 1983, $34,000 at 11% interest, which, in the climate of 1984, meant the loan payment alone was north of $4,200 a year. Banks were tightening everywhere. Interest rates had crushed a lot of farms the previous 2 years. Taking on more debt to improve throughput was not a casual decision. It was a calculated bet that speed and grain quality would justify the cost before the margins closed entirely. For 9 days, the bet looked like it was paying off. The early runs pulled corn from 22% moisture down to 14, 5 which was close enough to the 13. 5 target that the elevator would accept it without heavy dockage. The dryer ran overnight. The propane consumption was higher than the brochure suggested, but the throughput was real. Grain was moving. That's what mattered in October. Then, on a Tuesday morning, Warren climbed the inspection steps, checked the temperature gauge, and noticed the burner wasn't cycling. The control panel showed a fault code. He cut the power, waited, restarted. The panel lit up, ran through its sequence, and threw the same fault. The dryer stopped. It didn't just slow down or underperform. It stopped completely. He called the dealer in town before 8 o'clock. The service line said a technician could be out Thursday, possibly Friday. The system fault was almost certainly a sensor in the airflow circuit, but they couldn't confirm without a diagnostic. The part, if needed, would have to come from Des Moines. That was 2 days minimum, maybe 4. Warren stood next to the silent machine and looked at the sky. The forecast called for humidity in the mid-70s through the weekend, with overnight lows around 38 degrees. Not cold enough to stop biological activity in wet grain, warm enough to keep moisture doing exactly what moisture does when it has nowhere to go. He walked to the nearest temporary storage bin, a corrugated steel structure, 30,000 bushels capacity, that he'd filled the previous week. The corn in that bin had come off the combine at 21% moisture. It had gone through a partial dry cycle before the dryer faulted, which meant it was sitting somewhere between 18 and 20%. He didn't know exactly where because the last moisture reading had been taken at the dryer intake, not at the bin. That distinction mattered. Grain moisture content is not the same at every point in a bin. Corn at 19% moisture, held in a 30,000 bushel pile, does not just sit passively. It respires. Biological activity produces heat. That heat rises through the grain mass, carrying moisture vapor upward, where it cools and condenses near the top and outer walls. The result is uneven moisture pockets, some areas drying faster than others, some areas getting wetter, and hotspots forming where biological activity concentrates. Hotspots are not metaphors. They are measurable locations in a grain mass where temperature climbs above 90, 100, sometimes 120 degrees Fahrenheit. At those temperatures, mold accelerates. Grain quality degrades. What starts as a 5-foot diameter pocket of warm corn can spread through an entire bin in days if conditions are right and air isn't moving through the mass. The dryer stopped. Moisture kept rising in the temporary storage. Warren knew this without running numbers. He'd watched his father lose a partial bin of wheat in 1971 to a hotspot that nobody caught in time. He was not going to watch it happen again if he could help it. He called the dealer a second time Thursday morning. The technician had not arrived yet. The part was confirmed, an airflow proving switch in the burner safety circuit. It was on order. Arrival was estimated at Monday, possibly Tuesday. Warren did not argue. He asked if there was a workaround. The technicians said there was not. The safety interlock existed to prevent combustion accidents. Bypassing it was not an option, and the dealer would not advise it. That was 6 days, minimum, with wet grain in temporary storage and no working dryer. He sat at the kitchen table that evening and wrote numbers on a yellow legal pad. Corn price at the elevator was $3, 11 per bushel for number 2 grade at 15% moisture or below. Dockage for moisture above 15% ran at a sliding scale, approximately $0. Or 2 per bushel per half point of moisture above the threshold. At 18% moisture, that was roughly $0, 24 off the top. On 25,000 bushels, that was $6,000 in dockage before a single other problem showed up. Grade reduction was the second layer. Corn that showed mold, heat damage, or broken kernels got pushed down from number 2 to number 3 or below. Number 3 corn brought $0, 18 to $0, 22 per bushel less than number 2. On 25,000 bushels, that was another $4,500 to $5,500 in lost revenue. Combined with the moisture dockage, a grade drop on the stored grain could cost $10,000 to $11,000 on a crop that was already penciled out at thin margins. His loan payment on the dryer was $4,200 a year. The dryer, breaking down during the 10 most critical days of the season, threatened to cost more than 2 years of loan payments in a single spoilage event. Yield means nothing if storage fails. He needed to buy time. That meant keeping the grain from concentrating heat before the dryer came back online. The old bin stirrer was still installed in the number 4 silo, a flat-bottom steel structure on the north side of the property, built in 1968. The stirrer was a system Warren's father had put in during the early 1970s, a sweep-style auger driven by a small electric motor mounted on a center post. The auger arm rotated slowly through the grain mass, moving bottom grain upward and disrupting the natural temperature stratification. It did not dry grain. Nobody had ever claimed it did. The moisture content of the grain going into the bin was the same as the moisture content coming out. But what the stirrer did was prevent the moisture from concentrating in any single location long enough to trigger sustained biological heating. It was not elegant technology. It was a 1.3 horsepower motor turning a flighted auger at roughly 6 RPM. The whole system had been purchased used in 1972 for $480. Warren had maintained it, replaced the chain drive twice, rewound the motor once after a lightning strike in 1979, and had not seriously used it in 3 seasons because the new dryer made the stirrer seem redundant. Redundancy looks inefficient until it's necessary. He transferred as much of the wet corn as the number 4 silo could hold, approximately 12,000 bushels, and activated the stirrer. The motor hummed. The auger started its slow rotation. You could hear it from 20 feet outside the bin, a low mechanical sound, steady and unhurried, like something that had made that sound for years and intended to keep making it. The grain couldn't wait for the repair truck, but it could wait for the stirrer. On Friday, Warren climbed the silo access ladder and pushed a long-stem thermometer probe into the grain mass at 3 different depths. The readings were 64 degrees, 67 degrees, and 71 degrees, warmer near the center, which was expected but not climbing. The stirrer was doing what it was supposed to do, disrupting the thermal gradient before it became a hot spot. He took a handful of corn from the probe opening and held it. The kernels were still hard. No soft spots, no off smell. At 19% moisture, corn that's actively heating begins to smell, a faint, sweet decay, like silage starting to ferment. This grain smelled like grain. The 13,000 bushels still in the larger temporary bin were a different problem. That bin had no stirrer, no ventilation fan, and the grain had been sitting longer. Warren rigged a portable aeration fan to push air through a perforated floor duct he'd installed 2 seasons earlier. It wasn't designed for emergency aeration. The airflow was too low to move meaningful moisture, but it could at least interrupt temperature buildup near the floor. He ran it continuously and checked the bin twice daily. Saturday brought a change in humidity. The forecast had been wrong, which was not unusual in October in that part of the country. Instead of mid-70s humidity, the Weather Service was now reporting a slow-moving low-pressure system that would push warm, moist air through the region into Sunday night. Humidity forecasted at 82 to 86%, with overnight temperatures staying in the mid-40s. That was the worst combination for stored grain. High ambient moisture, temperatures too warm for grain to cool naturally, no way to dry through ventilation when outside air was already saturated. The dryer stopped 11 days ago in Warren's accounting. The repair parts had not arrived. He called Monday morning and was told the parts were delayed in a Des Moines warehouse due to a shipping backlog. New estimated arrival, Wednesday or Thursday of the following week. That was 2 weeks total without the dryer. He checked the number 4 silo again Monday evening. Thermometer readings, 68, 72, 74. The center of the grain mass was climbing. The stirrer was slowing the process, but it could not stop it. Moisture was still uneven. The top of the bin, where condensate had settled, was reading higher than the base on his moisture meter. He pushed a grain probe 12 inches into the surface layer and pulled it back, ran the sample through the handheld meter. 21, 3%. The base sample, where the stirrer was most active, read 18, 6. That too. 7-point differential was manageable for now. If the stirrer ran long enough, it would narrow, but the window was closing. He heard from his neighbor, Carl Dempsey, on Tuesday afternoon. Carl had corn in 2 bins without mechanical intervention of any kind. No aeration, no stirrer, no fan. He'd assumed the dryer issue would resolve in a few days and had left the corn in place. By Tuesday, Carl was looking at a hot spot in his south bin that had spread to roughly 40 feet in diameter at the 8-foot depth level. The grain in that zone had already discolored. He'd called the elevator to ask about options. The elevator said if the grain showed visible mold and heat damage on inspection, it could be rejected outright or downgraded to feed grain at $1.80 per bushel, $1.31 less than the number 2 price. On 8,000 bushels of affected corn, that was over $10,000 in a single spoilage event. Carl was going to lose part of his stored grain. There was not a straightforward solution available to him at that point. The hotspot had progressed too far for simple intervention. Warren did not take satisfaction in this. Carl's situation was a direct view of what his own bins looked like without the stirrer running. The difference between them was 12 days and 1 small electric motor. The stirrer kept turning. He ran cost calculations again Wednesday evening, this time including the propane costs he'd already sunk into the partial dry cycles before the dryer failed, the aeration fan electrical costs, and the interest accruing on the overall operation loan. The numbers were not good, but they were survivable. What would not be survivable was losing the grain on top of the equipment failure. The loan on the dryer was manageable if the corn graded out at number 2. It became genuinely threatening if the corn came in at number 3 with heavy moisture dockage. His wife, Ruth, asked at dinner Wednesday how bad it could get. He told her the number, the worst-case calculation if both bins degraded significantly. She didn't say anything for a moment. Then she asked if the stirrer was still running. He said yes. She said that was something. It was not a reassurance. It was just an acknowledgement that one variable was still under control. Thursday morning. The repair parts arrived at the dealer. Warren got the call at 7:40 a.m. The technician would be out that afternoon. He climbed the number 4 silo one more time before the truck arrived. Thermometer readings, 66, 68, 69. The center had actually dropped 2 degrees from Monday. The stirrer had redistributed enough of the warm grain to break the thermal concentration. Moisture meter on surface sample, 20. 1%. Base sample, 18. 9. The differential had narrowed from 2.7 to 1. 2 points. Not even, not dry, but stable enough that the grain had not tipped into active spoilage. He pulled a handful from the access port and looked at it carefully. Hard kernels, clean color, no soft spots, no off smell. The grain was stressed. It had been sitting at high moisture for nearly 2 weeks, but it was intact. The repair truck pulled in at 1:15 p.m. The technician, a man named Denny who'd worked on these systems for 6 years, had the fault diagnosed in 20 minutes. The airflow proving switch had failed, exactly as suspected. New switch installed in 40 minutes. Test cycle ran clean. The burner lit on the first attempt. The temperature climbed through the drying zone at the correct rate. The dryer was running again by 3 o'clock Thursday afternoon. Warren started pulling corn from the number 4 silo through the dryer that evening, running overnight at reduced capacity to bring it down carefully and avoid stress cracking the kernels from too rapid a temperature change. By Friday morning, the first load of recovered corn was ready for the elevator. He took a sample himself before loading the truck. Moisture meter read 13, 8%. He picked through the sample by hand under good light. No visible mold, no heat-damaged kernels, no significant broken material. The grade would be borderline, but he believed it would hold at number 2. The elevator grader confirmed it. The load came in at number 213, 9% moisture. Moisture dockage was minimal, 0.2 of a point above threshold, which cost him $0. That was as a weight per bushel. On the first 5,000 bushel load, that was $40. He drove back to the farm and sat in the truck for a few minutes before getting out. The corn had held, not because of anything dramatic, not because of luck or luck reversal. It held because the grain mass had been kept moving during the window when movement mattered. The stirrer had not dried the corn. It had not solved the moisture problem. It had bought 12 days of time, just enough time for the part to arrive, for the dryer to restart, for the process to resume. Technology increases throughput. It also increases dependency. The new dryer was a faster, more capable piece of equipment than anything Warren's father had ever run. Under normal conditions, it justified every dollar of its cost. But normal conditions are not the only conditions that occur in October. A sensor fails. A part is delayed. A low-pressure system brings 82% humidity for 4 days at exactly the wrong moment. The dryer that processes 400 bushels per hour becomes 400 bushels per hour of stopped. Moisture doesn't wait for replacement parts. The number 4 silo ran through the dryer over the next 5 days. Final grade on the recovered grain averaged number 2, with a moisture range of 13, 6 to 14. 1% acceptable at any commercial elevator. Total dockage across the recovered grain came to $214. The dryer repair bill, including parts and labor, was $610. The propane cost for rerunning the wet grain was higher than a standard single pass, but still within operating budget. The loan on the dryer was still there. 11% on $34,000 does not disappear because a sensor failed and a stirrer kept turning. Warren was not finished with the financial pressure of 1984. Nobody farming in 1984 was finished with that pressure. But the catastrophic scenario, the one where 25,000 bushels graded out at number 3 with heavy moisture dockage at a loss of $10,000 or more on top of a $40,200 per year equipment loan, did not occur. Carl Dempsey sold his damaged corn to a feed buyer in November. The loss came out to approximately $9,400 on the spoiled portion. He didn't talk about it much. Warren pulled the stirrer out of the number 4 silo in early November for its annual inspection. The motor was fine. The chain drive showed some wear. He replaced it before winter. The auger flights were intact. He greased every fitting, tagged it for service, and put it back. Some of his neighbors asked if he was going to sell the old stirrer now that the new dryer was running again. He said no. They asked why he'd want to keep that kind of old equipment around when it wasn't needed anymore. He thought about how to answer that. He said that when the dryer stopped, the stirrer was the only reason the grain made it to the elevator. If he'd pulled the stirrer out when he installed the dryer, which he'd considered because running two systems on the same bins felt redundant, he would have had nothing to work with during those 12 days. Grade determines survival, and the stirrer had held the grade. Nobody in the conversation said much after that. The dryer ran the rest of November and into December, processing the remainder of the crop without incident. By December, the bins were empty, the grain was sold, and the books for the 1984 season were closed. The margin was thin. It was a thin margin year for nearly everyone in the region. But the operation was intact. The loan was current. The farm was going into 1985 with equipment that worked, and no catastrophic loss to recover from. The stirrer sat in the number 4 silo through the winter, motor off, auger still, ready for the following season. It was not a relic. It was not a symbol of a better era. It was a 1.3 horsepower motor on a slow-turning auger that prevented wet grain from concentrating heat for 12 days while a replacement part traveled from Des Moines. That's what it was. The dryer stopped. The moisture kept rising. The old stirrer kept turning. In a crisis, survival isn't about speed. It's about what still works. If stories about resilience and preparation matter to you, subscribe.